inclusive early careers talent pipeline. My name's Jackie Grisdale. I'm a youth marketing consultant at SMRS. So what that means is that I lead across all of our early careers attraction clients. So I work with them on developing their early careers youth brand, finding insights and data about the market and their audiences, and then help them develop their propositions and activate those to attract early careers talent for their various different opportunities. And inherently in the early careers space, we use early careers as a mechanism for diversifying the people and the talent within our business. People will look to utilize early careers talent to kind of attract more of those underrepresented groups into the business, maybe using apprenticeships, internships, work experience opportunities as feeders through in to the business, and then obviously attracting graduates as they have done before. I was going to tell you a little bit about SMRS, but Natasha's done a fantastic job of doing that. We are a brand, culture and comms business, so whilst I specialise in early careers, we very much work with our colleagues over on Experienced Hire and with the kind of overarching employer brand work. But we also have more than half of our business dedicated to our work in education as well. So as well as working with employers on sort of career opportunities, we do also work with higher education institutions and colleges on attracting people into further and higher education as well. So here in early careers, we bring those kind of two main parts of the business together. And it gives us quite a nice, unique perspective. So I'll kick off with today's session. Please do feed kind of questions through into the chat, as Natasha said, as we go, and I'll answer them the best we can at the end of today's session. But first of all, what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of an overview around the kind of key pillars that we see as being fundamental to a successful early careers attraction strategy. Now, these are probably kind of, for some of you, sort of stating the obvious, but it's sometimes important for us to kind of reflect and remember all of the different components that we need in order to successfully attract people. We need clear objectives of what we're looking to achieve, and depending on your role, whether you sit within a brand or marketing function, or whether you sit within kind of recruitment, selection, or even managing early careers talent once they're on the business, we need some really clear objectives around what we want to achieve. Now, given the topic of today's session, that could be more specific than kind of your overarching early careers sort of objectives, and it could be more specifically about the types of talent that you're wanting to attract into the business and understanding why. Why is it that you want to diversify your pipeline? Why is it that you want to attract more people from perhaps some of those underrepresented groups that have previously been in your business? Is it about kind of breaking down barriers, ensuring access? Is it that you are noticing that you're not attracting particular types of talent, perhaps because of long-standing kind of legacy of your organisation? And have you defined that talent pipeline? Are you understanding the kind of different levels, the different roles, the different volumes that you're looking to attract? And do you understand your audience? Do you have insight on them? And I'm going to start today's session on the deep dive part around kind of data and insight. We're SMRS, we're a super data-driven organisation, and we really believe that you have to have that solid underpinning before you develop any of your strategies. But for me, this forms kind of two parts. Do you understand your audience? Do you understand their drivers, their motivators, their needs? And we're terrible at kind of stereotyping Gen Z as a whole cohort. But do we understand the nuances within our different audiences? Some of you may have done persona work previously, so you know that you'll have different audiences that you're attracting. Some may be more informed, they might be more driven, they might be more ambitious, and they'll actively seek out information. However, some of your audience might be a little bit more passive. They may not be as well networked or connected into your particular industry, and they may follow different journeys, different paths. They might have a different set of motivators and drivers. So it's really important to understand what that means for you, but also that kind of market data. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail earlier, but understanding the supply of talent, and are you able to achieve your objectives depending on the locations in the UK or globally that you're attracting into. may influence your success on being able to attract a representative cohort into your business. So you might need to think carefully about those geo location strategies as well. All of that needs to feed into your proposition and messaging. We need an appealing proposition, a value proposition for our audiences. And then we need to be able to share our story in a way that resonates with our particular audience segments. So when we're thinking about building inclusive pipelines, we need to think about the messages, the people that people can see in your advertising, for example, the ambassadors, the influencers that you're using for your marketing communications as well. And then we need to think about that through that entire student and candidate journey. And one of the case studies I'm going to share with you today is around HSBC and how they took a real data-driven approach to understanding how students were progressing through their process, where they were pinpointing the moments that matter, where they were losing certain underrepresented groups from their pipeline and why. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but I think it's super important that you think about that entire journey, not just through to onboarding, but beyond as well, because we need to make sure that people fit in and feel comfortable and feel included once they're within the business. And then obviously you've got all your different channels and content that you're using to kind of share those messages and thinking about the right ones to attract the particular audiences you're looking, both active and passive. And then of course, and fundamental to everything is the tracking, management, measurement and reporting of that. So we appreciate we've got lots of you on the call, about 97 of you. So my little counter at the top of the screen is telling me, and you're all going to be at a different starting point on your journey. Some of you may be more enhanced, more evolved in your process. You might have done some work around building inclusive pipelines already. But some of you, and I saw from some of the pre-questions before we started today's session, when you all signed up, some people are like, where do I start? So when we do any work in the kind of ED&I space, we kind of break it down into kind of 3 core steps. We'll always start with an audit of where our client is, or the person that we're working with, the organisation we're working with is. We want to understand what the challenges are, what's happening for them right now. So the first place we will look, or we'll try to look, is their data, and that's kind of the first piece, and I'm going to focus on today. So it's really important to set that benchmark. If you've done nothing on ED&I or kind of diversifying your pipeline, it's really important you know where you're starting from, because then we can benchmark that to build. And talking about benchmark, we always want to contextualize. So not only might you want to benchmark, okay, we did this last year, this is where we are now, and this is where we may want to be, but what does that look like in the bigger and wider context? So from a market supply perspective, is it realistic to put a 50-50 gender split for our particular business there, or 30% by 30, for example, are some of the stats and kind of KPIs that some of our clients are working towards. What's going on in that wider market? We've been through a number of turbulent years recently. So how might that be influencing what we can achieve and what our audience are thinking and feeling about us? Because that audit is also about your brand appeal, your brand awareness. So think about that context that you're operating within and making sure that you understand what that means. And only then, once we've done the audit, once we think about the bigger picture, can we start to think about how we can transform our strategies. So wherever you are, it's fine. But for me, it's really important that you take that kind of first step and start to think about auditing where you are. So that takes me on quite nicely to using data and insight to drive effective strategies, which was a kind of first learning point on our agenda for today. And so I've got a little quick question for you, and hopefully Natasha's already proved that it does work. So hopefully it works for me as well. So we've got a little quick question for you. So if you can launch the poll, Natasha, we wanted to know, before I get going on this, is how would you rate your use of data and insight on a scale of 1 to 10 currently, in terms of thinking about how you're using that data and insight to attract more diverse talent, to understand where you are and benchmark. 1 is poor, 10 smashing it, get off Jackie, I should be leading this webinar for you. So if you wouldn't mind selecting the option that you think represents you most accurately, that would be great. And then when you're ready, Natasha, and we've got a reasonable amount of responses, if you can share the result.
There's still a few coming through, so
cool.
yeah, give me 1 sec.
Fabulous. I didn't click anything because we might use all technology, so I can see a little poll option for me at the top, but I didn't want to. There we go. Okay, so you're feeling quite strong, some of you, so 16% 7, but most of you feel a little bit middle of the road. So probably you're not the worst in the world, but you probably have some way to go, which is super helpful to see. So hopefully what I'm going to share today is useful for you. Myself and my colleagues can talk about data and insight all day long. So please do get in contact afterwards if you want to explore any of this in more detail. And so first of all, it's just sharing why data is so important, and hopefully this isn't new thinking for most of you, but essentially it's taking that guesswork out of your attraction and outreach activity, and it's taking the guesswork out of where you are now. For me, it's okay to say I'm not sure where we currently are. I've got a sense that I think we're okay, that we're open and accessible to all audiences, but we all have blind spots. So data and insight and kind of getting that input, not only from a hard numbers and looking at what you're attracting and who you're attracting now, but also why. And that question of why is that happening and why is this the picture is super, super important. So it can obviously help you be super focused. So literally putting down the scattergun and thinking about where your people actually are. It allows you to measure, so it means that you can optimize and improve, and then obviously the more targeted you are, the more measured you are, the more effective you can become, and it can give you a clearer picture of that untapped talent. So whether that's from a global perspective around the UK, or just what schools, colleges and universities you're not going to, that could give you access to the talent that you're looking for. So it's super important, and where it comes from, lots of us will think it's all about our data. And that's probably the easiest source that you can get. So thinking about your ATS, and I saw lots of you on the registration forms had filled in what ATS you were using. So you have your ATS, you might have your registrations of interest forms on your website, etc. So you have your own data. You should hopefully have a fairly reasonable idea of who you're attracting and how they're progressing through the pipeline, because we want to look at the top and the bottom of the funnel, because that way we can understand, okay, is it an attraction issue? Is it do I need to fill the top of the funnel? Or actually, is it something about my pipeline that means those underrepresented groups, whether it's females, those from certain ethnicities, or those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or a disability, they're not getting through my pipeline. So we need to understand kind of what end of the scale is potentially the problem, or what's happening in the middle there. And your data is great to be able to do that. You can look at your website traffic, you can look at historical hire data to see how that has worked out. For those of you in development, etc., you can look at progression data. We've also got shared data, so maybe media partnerships, so you can start to talk to the likes of Rate My Placement, Bright Network, etc. What are their audiences looking like on their platforms? What are they seeing? How might you compare to other organisations out there? And that can be used to sort of inform your communications, enhance some of your targeting. Where you're thinking about programmatic, we can get some kind of lookalike audiences, but then also you've got that kind of wider market data. So data you can buy, data that you can access freely, that's published, etc. And that will give you a lay of the land and the landscape, and an idea. And you can layer all of those different facets of data together and build a picture. But we're showing a complete picture here. It's absolutely fine if you're only starting with your data, but as I mentioned earlier, it's always useful to contextualize. So if you can get hold of some of that market data to see how you compare, that really helps. And we can start to build those layers of data sets to help us target those diverse audiences, so understand the schools, colleges and universities that they're studying at. So what are the populations and demographics studying different subjects, or the subjects that may appeal to you? What does that look like? What's the gender split there? Back to those KPIs and targets earlier on. Is it realistic to expect that we, recruit 50-50 gender split, for example, if we are recruiting into predominantly STEM or computer science roles? It'll help you understand that supply. It also will help you impact on your student applications. As I mentioned, that top and bottom of the funnel. It can help you optimize your on-campus presence if you're collecting data around event attendance, who's attending, what demographics are they from, are they enabling you to tap into those underrepresented audiences. As I mentioned, it can help you look at those conversion rates, and that can all influence your building of an effective proposition and messaging. And ultimately what we want to be is more effective in what we're doing. We want to be more efficient, more effective, and focus our attention where it's really needed, rather than trying to kind of boil the ocean and do everything all at once. So when you're thinking about your data and your insight, all of you that were kind of loitering around the middle there, 4, 5, 6 out of 10, sort of think about what you're tracking and how you're tracking and measuring. Is it right for you? Are there some improvements and optimizations? Is it really giving you what you need? Is it aligning into your objectives and KPIs? We're all guilty of being able to go down a data rabbit hole. There is nothing more than I like than spending a day delving into somebody's data to understand what's going on. But we need to make sure we're looking at the right things. We need to make sure it's not just data, and that it actually builds a picture to answer that kind of so what question and help you with the why. How frequently are you reporting? Is that frequent enough? Does it have to be daily, weekly, monthly? Obviously, we want to know what's going on in our pipeline live in season, but then, there are some metrics that you may not need to measure as frequently. And does it help you to be agile? I know I've been bound by our, data rules and the way in which we capture data before. So think about if the frequency and the type of data you're collecting is enabling you to be agile. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk to you about a little bit of a case study, just to bring this to life for you a little bit. Hopefully it's interesting, and if you want to hear a little bit more, I can share that with you for sure. But we've been working with HSBC now for the 4 years actually that I've been with SMRS. So started, prior to that actually, but on this particular data project has been about 4 years or so. So when I started with HSBC, they asked me to deliver a bit of an end of season report. They wanted a kind of independent view of what was going on in their pipeline, how they were performing. And what I found as I went through that process is their data was everywhere. We had some data and PDF and PowerPoint reports from their ATS. We had scores from their testing and their testing solutions provider. We had some data from their media agency. We don't do that for them. So we had all these different data sources, and all the data differed, all the different data points didn't align. When it came to diversity, everybody was quoting different proportions of females, or at that point they were looking at BAME as a whole group of sort of minority ethnicities, for example. So there really wasn't any clarity. They recruit into about 2,000 roles globally. Their recruitment spans about 17 territories, 6 business lines, 40 different business areas, and currently they're getting over 100,000 applications for their insight, internship, graduate programs, placements, etc. And all of those different sources of data. Literally, they couldn't get a very clear view in a very timely manner, and we all need timely data of how many people were in their pipeline, what quality they were, and what the composition was. They literally were having to spend hours or days cleansing data to get any sort of view of what was going on. And when you're managing those sorts of volumes globally across all of those different territories with all of those different stakeholders, it was impossible for them. So what we did for them was built them a dashboard, and now we've got about 17 or 18 different visuals that we use for them. And here's some kind of bits of examples, and we're now at a very sophisticated end of the spectrum here with the dashboard that we've got for them. But what we did was start to work with, very much in partnership with their other suppliers, so with their ATS, with their selection provider and their, their media agency. And we started to say, okay, what data do you have and how can we start to plug this together? How can we go through maybe some automated processes for cleansing your data? And kind of making sense of that, making sure that it's accurate. And we've brought that together into a suite of different visuals for them so that they can, at a glance, at a click of a button, start to see who's in the pipeline, what proportion are female, what proportion are Black heritage, for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, those with a disability. They can filter it by all of their various different countries, territories, etc. And they can start to build a picture of what's going on. We can see what universities people are coming from, what what degree subjects they're coming from, what media sources. And we've also got results from candidate surveys. We plugged rare data in there for them as well. So now what they've started to be able to do is really interrogate that data. So over the last 4 years, we've been able to they're able to start asking much more sophisticated questions. So what this has done for them and it's been an iterative process over 4 years, and it's people have to realize that it's it is a journey to get to something that's sophisticated. But what they were quickly able to do within year 1 was get the accurate data to understand their position and get those benchmarks of where are we, what are we doing badly. So when things like the Black Lives Matter movement picked up after the killing of George Floyd, they were able to quickly say, okay, this is the proportion of Black heritage candidates that we have in our pipeline, but they were able to see where they were along those different stages of the pipeline. They were actually able to see that they were losing an awful lot of particular candidates at the very early stages of their process. So we were able to quickly identify where those conversions were different from the norm. We were able to then start to interrogate why. So is it that they're withdrawing from the process, or is it that they're failing? And is there nuances between different business lines, so commercial banking versus wealth and personal banking, for example? We were able to start to see actually lots were dropping out rather than failing. So we were able to do some qualitative insight to understand what was happening with those particular audiences. We were able to contextualize what it was. We were able to see that actually Black candidates were withdrawing in higher proportion before the first online assessment. For females, it was much more prevalent at the second stage assessment. So we were able to inform our kind of pipeline management, our nurture tactics there as well. So we were able to form those targeted interventions to engage and nurture along the way. We also did some kind of data science work to make sure that where there was correlations, and we saw that their tests were actually very fair, but it was just, and it wasn't necessarily that somebody was from who was Black heritage, and the fact that they were Black heritage that they were failing. It was actually because more likely that it was because they were from a lower socioeconomic background and perhaps needed some additional support, some upskilling. We've been able to take it one step further this year and start to do some pipeline modelling to do some kind of predictive stuff for them as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of how you can start to use your data and insight, your own data, to build that picture. So now we'll move on to using that market data, so that kind of broader segment of that diagram that we had. So we have a tool called Wyware. It's based on HESA data, which is freely available, but what we do is pull it together into a visualization tool that helps you visualize all of that different data to understand the kind of composition of talent studying particular subjects. So lots of you asked about where do I find diverse audiences, and I'm sure there's lots of you out there who've got those legacy university target lists that your senior stakeholders perhaps want you to target on a regular basis, but probably you're wanting to challenge that on a, I'm not sure that's probably the kind of best place for me to go to find my talent. So what we can start to do is use that supply data, that market data, to inform where we go. Where do we go on campus? Where might we want to do some digital activation to reach and find our audiences? So I've got some stats in the deck here for you as well. So we're starting off, I'll do a style setter for you. Did you know of UK undergraduate enrolments in 2021, 57% are female, and this is across all different subjects. 8% are candidates of Black heritage, 30% are from those from polar groups 1 and 2. So if those of you who might not be familiar with polar, it's a kind of measure, a quintile measure of those who are likely to progress into higher education, 1 and 2 being those deemed least likely and therefore likely to be from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I've got another poll for you, and those of you who are still with me and listening. I know I've talked a little bit at you there, and it's been a fair bit of data. So a quick question for you, Natasha, if you can launch the next poll, is what proportion of STEM students do you think are female? So we're talking about UK undergraduates studying across STEM subjects. I've excluded medicine and dentistry because we know that they have a higher representation of females. So if we're thinking about the traditional sciences, technology, engineering, etc., what proportion do you think are female? Do you think it's 20%, 30%, or 40%?
I'll just give it another 10 seconds, Jackie. I can still see numbers sort of coming through.
I was filling.
Okay. Let me share the results with you.
Cool. So 20%, most of you thinking quite a poor representation of females there, 40% of you thinking it's 30%, and 9% thinking it's 40%. God, I've got all my numbers wrong there. It's actually, if I can click on, 30% who are female amongst that audience. So probably a little bit higher than most of you are anticipating, which I kind of feel is a positive thing. Representation kind of dips when you compare to the average just slightly for Black heritage, but does drop a couple of percent for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And then Natasha's ready and waiting with another quick question for you. This time we'll look at computer science students. So what proportion of computer science students do you think are of Black heritage? Do you think it's 6, 8 or 10%? And once the votes are
still coming through.
Oh, so a little bit more of an equal balance there. So equally thinking 6 and 8%, with just a little fewer of you thinking that there, I was just doing a time check there, 27%. So actually it's positive news. 10% of those studying computer sciences are of Black heritage, but it drops even further to just 16% of computer science subjects, students are female, and it drops a little bit with regards to social mobility, again to 27% being from polar groups 1 and 2. So what we start to see is that as we look at different subjects, and then indeed when we start to layer over universities to that, we see a really changing profile of students. So for those of you who are needing to attract into software, computer science, AI, cyber roles, and your stakeholders are wanting 30, 40, 50% female, that's super challenging when only 16% of all students studying computer sciences are female. However, we do see a slight overrepresentation of those from Black heritage. And then when you group kind of all minority ethnicities, we see that kind of uplifts again. And I just chucked a couple of stats in here for you. So of the 2,265 female computer science students enrolled in 2021, so your total talent pool of those female students is that are graduating each year, around kind of just over 2,000 students. Only 6 universities have more than 50 females that are likely to graduate next year. So those enrolling in that 2021 period, if we assume they're doing a 3-year degree, graduating in 2024. So a small opportunity, and you'd have to be quite pinpoint, sort of quite targeted in terms of where you're going. And often what we'll do is when we look at the universities, one of our employers, our targeting. We did this for a big defence client, and literally presented their results to them last week. For engineering opportunities, you know, the universities, their current targets actually were tapping into the university they should be, but when it came to computer science subjects and AI software that they were wanting to target for cyber roles, for example, their current target universities were nowhere to be seen in the top 20 universities feeding students into those opportunities. So it's really important to start to think very carefully about the universities you're targeting and what you want to achieve. So is it that you're looking to target particular universities to reach more Black heritage students, for example, or reach a bigger population of females, or engage with more of those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Of those universities that I mentioned a minute ago, just 2 of them have more than 10% of their cohort being Black heritage, as well as that kind of higher representation of females, or that higher volume of females as well. And out of those, you know, often, you know, some of us are still having to target Russell Group universities from a legacy perspective, but 4 of those universities actually aren't Russell Group. So it's all about making the case for opening up the pipeline. And I know one of the people signing up for today's session did ask a question around kind of how do you influence senior stakeholders. We've been working with the likes of Deloitte, EY, DSTL, MBDA, Frontline Police Now, Unlocked, helping all of them with the rationale and the data and the insight to underpin why they should be reaching a more diverse group of universities in order to influence those kind of KPIs around sort of reaching diverse talent. And then moving on finally, because I know time is trotting away, is targeting interventions to have maximum impact. So we mentioned earlier on about HSBC's data-driven journey around kind of understanding where people drop out of their pipeline. But of course, that just looks at from application through to hire, and where people are engaging there. And really looking at that ATS perspective, we've now started to layer on data from the likes of Meet and Engage and using their timeline and preparation portal products to help nurture candidates there. So we have that, we've got candidate survey information, but the process is much longer than that. And one of the things I think we're guilty of in early careers is wanting to turn a tap on in October and expect people know who we are, they know our brand, they find our brand appealing, and then they're going to apply to us. But what we need to understand is the decision-making journey is much longer than that. And particularly when we're wanting to build inclusive pipelines and reach those underrepresented groups, those groups that we haven't traditionally reached and engaged with before, who haven't found us appealing as an employer, that's going to be a much longer journey. And your candidate's mindset will start to change as they progress through that journey. And that could start early. And we know that a good portion of young people make or exclude certain careers as early as 7 years old. So I know lots of us won't have the budget to be engaging that early on, but we need to start to think about strategies that we can deploy to start to keep doors open longer. And it may be that they don't want to work for our particular brand or in our sector ultimately, but if we can keep influence and keep those doors open for longer, it means that further up the kind of chain, once people start getting through to GCSE and A-level age, that the opportunities we offer in our organisations are still open to them. And obviously they've got that varied emotional, mental and physiological barriers. So it's important to think about your audiences, and back right to the very start where I said about the context. This is where it's really important to start to think about your different candidates and how they progress. And you'll have your different personas, you'll have different groups. But what we were able to do with the work that we did with HSBC is understand where our pain points were, and then think about how we might be able to improve them. So is it our brand appeal? Is it that we're not getting traffic through to our website? Is it that we're not being reflective of diverse audiences in our messaging and communications? Is it that we're presenting barriers through high academic criteria, for example? Is it that we only recruit in certain areas and therefore that might influence the audiences that we can engage with? So What we do often with some of our clients is a kind of candidate journey mapping piece, and that can start from the very, very start. What's on your website, what's out there, what are we engaging with them, and kind of what's the message and what's the intent that we want to build there. So I've mapped out some of these, and every different organization has different journeys, different nuances to this. So I recommend looking at doing something like this in your teams and literally getting a nice big wall, get your post-it notes and think about, okay, what are all the different stages? What are all the different touch points that somebody might have with us? And how are we ensuring that these are inclusive? So if you're recruiting people into cyber, tech, STEM type disciplines, particularly those around kind of computer science, so as I mentioned, cyber, AI, that kind of thing, you're probably going to have a high representation of neurodiverse candidates applying for you. So is our messaging, our communication, our advertising, does that have clarity of message? Are we using straightforward, direct language for them, or are we using lots of acronyms or kind of over describing something so that it doesn't particularly make sense to people? What we want our potential candidates to have is a very clear understanding of our opportunities, what we're like as an employer, the proposition that we're offering, and if it connects in with them. So by going through this kind of mapping process, we're able to start to identify, okay, are we ensuring that we're reflective of the audiences that we want to attract? Is our messaging tailored for them from that initial attraction, engage process through to application? So for those candidates who are dropping out at the first stage, what can we do to nurture and encourage them? Can we do some pre-skilling with them? Can we shape some of our outreach activity to target that through key partners to reach some of those underrepresented groups? There's many, many different partner organizations, suppliers out there who focus on supporting underrepresented groups, whether it's those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or particular segments of your audience. So can we work in partnership with them to understand their perceptions of us as a brand or our process, and or what it is that they're struggling with in our process, and work with them to improve that? Can we use some of our current early careers talent to feed into this candidate journey mapping to understand what they did? Or maybe you want to do a more robust survey that kind of really does help you develop different personas, not based on demographic, but just based on information needs. We did a piece of research with BP just before the pandemic, in fact, where we wanted to understand, they were looking to pull back from campus because they had some negative perceptions of their brand being on campus. They wanted to understand the impact that not being on campus would have for them in the minds of students. Now, it was perfectly timed in a way because it was literally just before the pandemic. So they had already done a bit of that research and insight to understand kind of how young people wanted to access information about them. And what we did and found was that, for example, STEM students just wanted to access information on demand. There were some other segments of their audience that wanted more hand-holding, wanted the opportunity to engage with, with different people from within the business. So they were able to start to develop, nurture communications and nurture journeys and understand kind of the information needs all the way along that different journey early, and how they could do that digitally because if they couldn't be on campus. So here you can see that kind of candidate experience mapped out right from beginning through to kind of onboarding, developing when they're on program with you. And obviously, in terms of thinking about that inclusivity piece, when we're developing our messaging and our proposition and telling them what it's like, we need to make sure that obviously that's reflective of their experiences when they're there as well. So it's working across all of those different stakeholder groups to understand that entire journey. Obviously, you need to think about engagement across all of your different channels. So it's very much about thinking about where your audiences are and how they want to consume that content, as I just mentioned in that BP instance. Your owned stuff is your own real estate, your website, your ATS, your blogs, if you're using any of those nurture CRM type technologies, your assessment centres and any of that video content, your open days are super persuasive. So make sure you're being kind of reflective of all of the different audiences that you're wanting to attract. When you're thinking about your paid stuff, what channels are you using? Particular social networks are great. Are you aligning to certain brands or aligning your advertising alongside content that might be consumed by your particular different audiences? Can we use audio technology to better better target some of our audiences? Can we align advertising around certain programs if we're using VOD as a channel and a route to market? And then obviously we want to earn our stuff. So ambassadors and influencers are so important when we're thinking about reaching, engaging and including diverse audiences. So making sure that you are using people who have been there and done it. You know, we're all familiar with the kind of, if you see it, you can be it examples. And that's not just your kind of current graduates and apprentices, but also thinking about those who are a few years on and starting to succeed and progress. For underrepresented groups, they need to know that they're going to be able to progress within an organisation too. So don't forget to use kind of your internal influencers, ambassadors, but also don't completely rule out kind of social media influencers and those people who create content. They often have those kind of micro and nano influencers. They often have quite niche audiences, you know, and they can be a great route to kind of reach in passive audiences that may never have considered you before. And we've done some successful stuff with Network Rail, BT, BP, on using kind of those societies, alumni networks, influencer audiences as well. And then one final little case study just to round us off, because I'm now waffling on a little bit, is we've done this with Unlocked. So with them, their challenges were around kind of attracting more BAME audiences, more men for them was the challenge, and more of those from sort of non-social science subjects. Being a prison officer, as you can imagine, is not the most appealing career opportunity, you know, sort of option, particularly for somebody who may be studying at Russell Group University, for example, or who's paid significant amounts. So what we did was an awful lot of research and insight, persona mapping, to develop a video content that would get a reaction. So I will send the link to the video in the follow-up communication that we've got, but it was a What the F campaign. We did this for them probably about 3 years ago now, and it really landed for them, because what we did is align different messages to their 3 different persona types. So they had an active, bold and brave and go-getter persona kind of archetypes. So what we did was get to the heart of what motivates them and develop that suite of content. So once we challenged and turned heads of audiences with the initial hero video, we were then able to tell an ongoing story that connected in with those different drivers and motivators based on those different audiences. So was it about what your nan thinks, or what your potential girlfriend may think, or your dad thinks, or your mum, for example? Is it about more kind of tangible benefits? Is it more about the impact that they could make? We started to nurture and build that kind of communication and that story as somebody went through the application process. We had supported content that really brought to life what that meant for somebody who looked and felt like they did, whether that, you know, be it a man or somebody from a kind of Black or BAME ethnicity. And then we obviously used influencers there as well. So we had video content, Instagram stories, reminder posts as well. And we got huge results from it, so increasing in kind of reach and engagement digitally, but most importantly, they translated through to an increase in candidates from minority ethnicities, an increase in applications for male, and increasing volumes of applications for just generally. And that's continued over the last few years as we've built and enhanced on their content. So the last thing from me, the last kind of 5-10 minutes of questions is obviously make what you're saying to your audiences meaningful and specific to your different audiences. Do be honest, don't make false promises or kind of say anything that isn't truly you. Use ambassadors and advocates to kind of tell your story and connect in with the different audiences that you're looking to attract to kind of build that kind of inclusive feel. Do talk about your culture and your values. They're really interested in whether they fit in here. What will it feel like? Is it really reflective of what I think? Are there other people like me here? Do involve your early careers audiences in your marketing content and making sure that they feel that it's reflective to them. As marketeers, you know, we're not necessarily always the ones that know we need to speak to the people that we're trying to attract. And then don't forget to obviously talk about your kind of ESG, sustainability, etc. That's very important to lots of audiences, and you know, regardless of their segment, they're interested in that kind of content from you.